Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the PRME Global Forum. Give a minute for everyone to get settled, but in the meantime, welcome. I'm Dr. Meredith Story. I've been with PRIME for years as a community member and more recently as the Secretariat for the last several years. But just to welcome you all, thank you for joining this session. Some housekeeping, our session is being presented in English, but there are interpretation options available, so please navigate the interpretation at the bottom. It is on your Zoom panel for the language selections. You can tune in Spanish, French, Arabic, or Russian. Thing number 2 we'd like to touch on is just to please use the Q&A box at the bottom for any Zoom panel questions that you may have about the speakers towards the speakers, and hopefully we can be answering those either live or towards the end of the session, just depending on the level of urgency there. You can click the resources tab at the bottom, the button there on the Zoom panel, and you'll be able to see any documentation related. I know that Sam's been working hard to make sure that all of the resources related to the I-5, and there are a lot of resources related to the I-5, so feel free to review those as we go ahead. And many of those resources also have implications to what you'll see here today, particularly Jack's work. And then the session is being recorded and it will be available in the Zoom events lobby. So to dive into the content of this session today, I'm just so happy that you're all here. Being online, of course, we don't have that same personal connection, but there are great strengths, the ability that we can all join each other from exactly where we are, meeting as ourselves, working together, being able to listen to each other and learn. That's something that's been very practical for the I-5, because as we're seeing, so many of you are experts in your own context, in your own classroom, in your own pedagogy and process. So it's nice to be able to take these reflections today and share what we've been up to hear from these experts that have helped to build the I-5 into what it is today and what we hope it to be tomorrow, and then to move forward as well. So in the opening session, Sanda Ojambo was really driving home the need for skills to fill the workforce and to achieve societal needs towards sustainable development. When we look at the I-5, we know how much of this is skills oriented. And throughout the last couple of years, the process has been to identify the characteristics that we hope can inform this skill building for the educator and for the student, like really emphasizing meaning, joy, active engagement, social inclusion, and iteration. All of these elements can help us to develop ourselves holistically and can help us to really see these values in the classroom. Omid also talked about the use of using these words and this language to communicate and identify our roles in this shared space, that we're able to have conversations that lead us to identifying where the gaps are, then to identify and articulate these gaps so that the educators and businesses, students and educators, we're all filling the gaps together. And then the final step there, working with our own expertise together to fill these gaps. Omid even used Peter Drucker's words on what gets measured gets managed. And I feel like that is just something that we've been working on to make sure that we can identify what the I-5 can do to help fill gaps in pedagogy, can help fill gaps in these contexts around the world. So all of this is so thematically relevant to what we're looking to come through today. So thank you for joining us. There's been a history of I-5 at the Global Forum. You might have been here 2 years ago when it was also virtual. You would have been hosted at that point by John Goodwin, the former CEO of the LEGO Foundation and now the former interim head of PRIME, along with Daniel Wilson, who is the director of the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Project Zero. Both of these huge forces of nature showed up and they gave a wonderful presentation. You may have remember playing with the ducks. There was a bit of an activity where you built with ducks and they floated through the pond to get your creative juices flowing, to think about what the I-5 could look like, what play, what creative space could look like for your own classroom, even in a virtual classroom. So that was 2 years ago, but last year we really kind of laid the roots for what the project has become today as it's a public offering. Last year we hosted introduction workshops and kickstarted the engagement at the Global Forum in a pre-events day and then throughout the conference. We celebrated the contributions of your chapter through the expert pedagogy members who have remained active throughout the course of the last year, particularly in your own chapter activities, in helping us host, helping us coordinate, and teaching us lessons of what local practice looks like. And last year was really the moment of launching the I-5 as a public offering to the PRIME community. So in some way, this is the I-5's first birthday party. So we're just so happy to have you along. It really is a great moment for us. In that first year, I mean, there's always going to be milestones. We've published the I-5 playbook in English, Arabic, Spanish, Russian, French, Hindi, and Portuguese. So if any of those speak to you a bit more, please do check them out. They'll be linked in the link tree here. We've listened and learned to your stories of best practice and published these in 2 different iterations of the I-5 View Book so that we can help facilitate the process of learning and sharing from each other. We've sought to hear not just from the individual educators, but from the deans, directors, and any stakeholders who've been able to join us through the roundtables and dialogue discussions that we've hosted. We've created support systems through the I-5 workshops, supporting dialogues, keynotes, and even hosting a 2024 certification process, which is still ongoing if you're interested to collaborate. And we've worked to create opportunities for you all, that it's not just happening from the Secretariat, that you might be doing local workshops or you might be working with your chapter or your working group, but there's more there that can be used as kind of carrots for engagement. We've been working with the Ivy Publishing and Tima Bansel's group for case studies towards the I-5 on similar themes and practices around I-5 in your classroom. We've launched a call for papers with Neil Marriott and the International Journal of Management Education. This will mark the 3rd Prime special issue in that journal and shows a very rich history. Carol Parks and the others who have put this down laid these roots for us to grow from. And we've also created engagement opportunities for students and academics through the Oikos LEAP partnership. You'll all know Oikos, such a large student organization, and the great work that they do. We've been able to build with their researchers to create meaning for early educators and late stage students as well. Speaking of partnerships, we've also worked with Sullytest to continue our work there. We've learned from our partners at Project Zero at Harvard Graduate School of Education. We've brought along new partners, which is a lot of what you'll see today with these faces. And we're just really excited to continue this dialogue. So today we're joined by Garrett, Jack, and Mary. Some of these are very familiar faces and some of these are new faces. Now, there's a twofold reason for that. Some are because people like Mary has been in the Prime community for a long time, that they've been working through giving voice to values. Garrett has been with Prime in very different capacities throughout the years because he used to be a LEGO representative as well, so he knows the roots. Jack more recent, but also the reason Jack's face might not be familiar is because it's that back end support. It's that maybe not the public facing community work, but the one that gets us the resources and makes things attainable for everyone to be engaging with each other. So there's just a number of reasons to be engaging today. And as you know, it takes all sorts, it takes a community. So we're here together as that community, and we're just very excited to continue the conversation. I'm going to give just the tiniest introduction to each of our speakers, but if we could just pass around the ball, Garrett to Jack to Mary, and do a bit more of a full introduction there. Like I mentioned, Garrett comes to us from LEGO originally, but we're so lucky to be taking him as one of our partners now, as the director and founder of Winded Vertigo. Jack is the founder and creative director at the Data Face, who has been so incremental, so influential in working through our data story, being able to articulate what the I-5 means, not just amongst the community members, but to a wider audience. The same conversation that you're all grappling with on how do we mainstream sustainable development, asking ourselves the hard questions and having a voice that can come to those and help kind of ease the pain of making conversations relevant across different audiences who might not share that core fire in our bellies. And then Mary Gentili, who is well known as the director of Giving Voice to Values, long roots in Prime, as I've mentioned, but also with the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business, Babson College, Harvard Business School, and the Aspen Institute. So Garrett, I will first pass to you, and then if we could do just a round, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Meredith. It was nice to hear the story again, but also to get reintroduced to everyone. Yeah, so it's interesting to talk about the story of the role of LEGO and the LEGO Foundation and the role that I played in the last few years, and then coming to this side of it to support and kind of provide some of the services that I hoped for when I worked at LEGO, which is to really have a learning agenda and help Prime and I-5 become more of a learning organization, so that when we have questions, we know how to ask them, how to answer them, and then to truly engage with the community. So I'm just grateful to be here. Yeah, I have a long background in play and the foundations of this work, and many of the names that you listed as well. So thank you so much, and I'll hand it off to Jack.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Jack Beckwith, based in San Francisco. And as Meredith already alluded to, I run the Dataface, which is a digital agency which specializes really in data visualization and data communication. So we basically help companies and nonprofits, research teams kind of translate their data into really interactive and engaging stories. And that's kind of what we tried to do for Prime in a nutshell, and we can dive into it more in a moment. But I'm really excited to be here, and I'll pass it off to Mary.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, I'm Mary Gentili. I'm delighted to be here as well. As Meredith said, I spent a good bit of time working with first the Global Compact, then Prime and some of its task forces. And now I'm really happy to be working with I5. My career has been primarily in the field of management education, MBA programs, a number of institutions, as Meredith mentioned, and focusing on the topic of values-driven leadership development. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is giving voice to values, which is an innovative pedagogical approach for that, which was delightful to see how well it fit with the I5 learning principles. So I look forward to talking about that.
Thank you all. So if we could kick off with the first question here, just as a bit of a holistic picture. None of you are Prime community members. I mean, Mary, to an extent you have been, but you're returning now. And none of you are Secretariat members. So when we made these partnerships, we really reached out to try to find people who had a different angle to the story to tell, that you all come to us with different expertise, but none of you kind of sit in that RME space naturally. Now, I could try to say it, but I know you'll all say it best. So the question is really, how does your work help to advance our work? How do you see the importance of responsible management education, the importance of the Prime community, of these pedagogies that we're working through, and of the community itself, the core work? How do you see that as being advanced through your own skill set? Garrett, perhaps first to you.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, in a variety of ways. I think the first couple of things that come to mind when we've been talking about learning through play and lifelong learning, the impactful 5, those characteristics are driven, but from the foundations of early childhood development and how we look at learning as throughout the lifespan. And so we've been putting a lot of resources, and I think the community who thinks about play very often, early childhood and school, and even earlier than that, we think about lifelong learning, but ultimately we prepare children for this. But what happens when they leave the friendly confines of school? And so I think when we think about primary, secondary schools, or even into early childhood, what does that conversation look like over time to say, we're going to prepare you for the real world, because play is going to help you learn, and it's going to make you more engaging, and you're going to be able to use and apply the information that you get. But then we drop you off into this real world, and play has a very different context and connotation even. So at some level, it feels like we're delivering on that, a landing opportunity, creating an environment that's more amenable, but also respects the fact that these playful pedagogies can deliver on real world influence and real world development. And so I think that's really exciting for me, to think that we're actually building a holistic and kind of lifelong, long-term view on the impacts of play. But then I think there's also this, let's start to celebrate the fact that the playful characteristics, the impactful 5, are actually really great tools at developing innovation and the sustainability, and being able to be open-minded to people that you're not familiar with. So this kind of diversity piece. And so I think in a lot of ways, just the implementation of the I5, I think, is really exciting for me. Then to go a little bit further about, like, what do we bring? So my team at Winded Vertigo, we're a collective of learning designers. We have graphic designers. We have people who plan, design, and facilitate play experiences. I think our opportunity is to take the I5 and much of the great work and the resources and the theories, and start to give the community, the Prime community, opportunities to try it out and to actually live the words that they read and see, so that they can practice these in a place where it's safe for you to make mistakes. It's safe for you to be awkward when you're learning something new. And if not unlike those of us who aren't in the RME community, that some of us who really think a lot about pedagogy and changing the way that we teach and being flexible, that we can influence them and give them an opportunity to not be experts for a moment, and actually be children, and childlike, and play with what's going on here. And then while we do it, we also provided them with resources and that community from which they can actually be successful or be set up to succeed. And so we, in many ways, provide them with resources, like I said, those workshops and trainings. We're also developing this really cool way to capture holistic skills development, so that It's an opportunity for the faculty to get feedback on whether them taking that chance and making that case study a little more innovative and a little more iterative, that we get feedback to them to say what is working with your students and which ones are impacting the development of their skills. We also think it's really important that if we're going to give them resources and a community, how do we track how they get engaged and find out which parts of those resources and community outreaches are actually impactful as well, so that we can find out what works from the umbrella of the I-5 to say, this is really helpful. And so all of that together, I think we're using this learning agenda to really kind of help, again, the I-5 and more broadly, the Prime community find ways to learn about what works, listen to the community, give them the tools, and largely get out of their way. So give them the resources, step back, make it so that it's not a heavy lift for them to change the way that they teach, and in fact, make it fun for them so that they can make the mistakes, share those mistakes more broadly, because that is what we talk about when we talk about the impactful 5, is that we iterate together, we're socially interactive, we find the joy. When we make mistakes, we find meaning when we're doing that, and so on. So I think that's it for me for now. Could talk about this all day. It's a very exciting project from our end, and I hope that you find our resources and our support helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. Jack, if I could transition to you, just because I think that resources element really feeds well into what you've been up to.
Yeah, sure. So maybe as a little bit of a preamble, we started working with Prime, I guess in the summer of 2023, once the I-5 playbook was almost final, and you, Meredith, and the rest of the Prime team kind of approached us with this vision of taking the playbook and turning it into something that was fun and immersive and really built for the web. And that made a ton of sense, right? Because it just plays right into the ethos of the Lego Foundation, their mantra of learning through play. And it's a lot of what we do at the Dataface on a daily basis, trying to help our clients reimagine or be creative in taking content that's maybe static and turning it into something that's really awesome and engaging and interactive. So, creating a web-based version of the playbook was going to unlock a lot of things that you can't do in a written document. You can introduce movement, there's user interaction, the layout of the content can be different and innovative, you can solicit feedback. So anyway, we embarked on the journey of digitizing the playbook over about 6 months. And our team basically created kind of like this multi-page site with obviously Prime's help. We had the homepage, we had these kind of 5 dedicated pages to each of the I-5 characteristics where we, inserted the signature moves and case studies and all that stuff. And then we also had this data story, which was kind of net new. And the point of the data story, what we called the story of I-5, was really to give people context around why I-5 existed and really create a compelling case about just why it's so necessary in this current moment. So we pulled together just kind of a bunch of external data that showed that, one, unsurprisingly, we're pretty far away from a sustainable future and businesses can be doing a lot more to help. Two, that, business education is just a really important lever for change. Like it has the ability to make a huge impact because of the leaders it creates. And then third, that I-5 as a pedagogy can really fill a void and can create leaders of the future who are dedicated to sustainability and have the holistic skills we need. So anyway, that's all stuff that everybody here knows. But it was fun. We, pulled together a bunch of different data and showcased it in creative ways. And I think we did a good job. So anyway, that's kind of how I fit into the equation. I'm excited to keep working with Prime. But as I said, I think Prime's mission and everything that I-5 stands for actually corresponds really neatly or ties in really neatly to what the Dataface is all about. So it's been great to work together.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Jack. And then Mary, over to you.
Thanks very much, Meredith. Well, it's fun listening to Garrett and Jack because it makes me feel, and you, Meredith, makes me feel even more sure that giving voice to values fits here well. The mission of Prime is around transforming management education, and then I-5 brings in these 5 sort of playful and creative and interactive and engaging and personally meaningful learning approaches. And that, when I think about why I developed Giving Voice to Values, it's a pedagogy, it's an innovative approach to values-driven leadership development. And I created it because I thought the way we were teaching about values and ethics and socially responsible behavior in business schools was entirely cognitive. And I wanted to bring a behavioral aspect to it. We would kind of teach the rules, but none of the tools, you know, we would present dilemmas and engage people in debating what's the right thing to do. And often what we've learned from the research is that people will argue that the right thing to do is the thing that they think it's possible to do. And so in a way, by presenting the work the way we were presenting it in these leadership and ethical and responsible management courses, was giving people the opportunity to develop better rationalizations for a limited sense of what was possible. And really, to break out of that, we needed to create a different kind of pedagogical approach, which is what Giving Voice to Values is. We created what we call the Giving Voice to Values thought experiment, where instead of developing just traditional cases and scenarios, I used to run the case writing program for Harvard Business School. I was very familiar with that. But instead of doing that, we wrote and developed many, many short cases. They're all based on real experiences. But the big difference was they ended with a main actor, a protagonist, who already had decided what the right thing, the appropriate thing, the responsible thing, the sustainable thing to do was. And the question was, how could they get it done? So then we had a process for working students through creating scripts and action plans and kind of a decision tree of scripts and action plans. So if you try this and you get this response, then what would you do? And initially this was all on paper, but then we started working with online programs, developing MOOCs and developing interactive cohort-based training programs. And eventually companies and other organizations, NGOs and the US military and various UN agencies started coming to us and asking, can we approach this in a similar way? And so I think that part of the reason it's been so appealing to people is the same reason that the I-5 principles have been so appealing to people, because it frees people up. It encourages people to be more creative, to think about what's possible, to create what I call a new moral muscle memory, so that acting on your values and acting in these positive ways feels more natural. It doesn't feel like it's always pushing against the tide. And we're actually freeing people up to behave in those ways. So I'm thrilled to be collaborating with all of you.
Beautiful, thank you. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat and the Q&A, but just I would like to ask one more question myself. Originally, I'd kind of said, as a light prompt, if you could all be prepared to speak to your vision for student and societal change. But from what you've said today, I'd like to add on to that question a little bit, because I think that those that are in the audience today have their own motivations for being members of PRIME, for being drawn to the I-5, for wanting to see change in their own context. And Garrett, you said creating resources and letting people get out of their way. Jack, you said getting people to be creative, to think creative, to have an immersive experience. And Mary, you said a lot about that, but the cognitive versus behavioral needs, I think, stuck out to me, where we don't necessarily know what it is that people need, but we do know that we need to fill these gaps. So I would like to ask just the question around motivation, how you see the community, how they can individually build that motivation in their own context, build that motivation for themselves to be able to communicate like this, and how you find that motivation for yourself.
Who did you want to start, Meredith?
I don't want to put anyone too far on the spot. So if anyone feels more naturally inclined to start, I'll go that route.
Well, I'm happy to start if that's okay with Garrett and Jack. When I think about my own motivation, and I think there's a good fit with what I-5 is doing in PRIME. My own motivation in this work was to change the conversation, by asking a different question. Traditionally, when we're approaching a lot of these kinds of issues around values and sustainability and responsible behavior, we ask what's the right thing to do. And I wanted to ask the question, once you know what's right, how can you get it done successfully? And I think by changing that conversation, it just shifts people to a different place. We know from the research that people are more creative when you bring the pressure down. And so when I ask that question, I always ask, what if you were this individual who's already decided this is what they want to do? How could they be effective? And it enables people to free themselves up. They're not already limiting themselves, thinking about, well, would I say that or could I do that? And so I think changing that conversation is what's important to me. I also, when you give a talk, I'm sure Garrett and Jack have had similar experiences. Often people at the end will say, what's the one thing you hope people will walk away with, and so you always have to boil down your hour-long talk into one thing. But I usually say that what I want is for people to feel like they have more choices than they thought they did. Because a lot of what we know from the way people behave is that we tend to limit ourselves because we're trying to avoid the negative consequences. And what I'm trying to do is create an experience where people are actually encouraged and enabled and actually required to envision the positive consequences. So I want, or the positive options. So I want people to feel like they have more of those options. So, and that's what motivates me too. So
I love it. I can go next. So it's interesting. I went to business school once upon a time. I did my undergrad at Wharton and loved my experience there. And I always tell people the two things I walked away with were an awesome network of talented people, goes probably without saying. And then two, just a lot more concrete mathematical skills than you might expect. That's where I discovered my love of data and statistics, and that's where I dug into regressions and Markov models and all that sort of stuff. So what I delved a little bit less deep into was some of the soft skills that I think Prime really embodies, and the I-5 specifically really embodies, and things that have become so important to me in my day-to-day as a leader at the data face. Things like thinking how to build effective and collaborative and diverse teams, things like, how to create a mission-driven organization, really stick to its values, thinking about the broader impact of my business on the world and community and so forth. So I guess my motivation for getting involved in the first place was I love what Prime stood for, and I loved that the I-5 skills, I think I would have really enjoyed having as a toolkit or just having in the classroom when I was in business school. And I guess, I just think back to some of the upper level statistics courses. I was so enthralled with math, and I always have loved math. But I think opportunities to not just crunch the numbers and do the homework, but connect those Markov models to how they can help influence the world around me and how I can use those tools to kind of change the world for the better in kind of a larger and softer way. Would have been really awesome to me. So that's kind of my intrinsic motivation for doing this work, is to influence future students and create just better learning environments for them. And I guess for everybody, in the room to think about what motivates them, I guess it's really boils down to, influencing future leaders and small business owners like myself who are going to be better leaders from the get-go. And some of the stuff that I've, had to tackle, I've learned by doing my own research or by trial and error and that sort of thing. But being able to shape leaders earlier on to have holistic skill sets will just set them up for success. So there you go.
Oh, this is cool. And I love the nerdy statistical background too, Jack. That's great. I think, and I kind of want to spin off that a little bit, is my understanding of this community, and at least if I can speak really honestly, I feel like one of my roles in the world is to take the skills, the passion that I have, and find out where they're most useful. And then I think that also is to kind of think even more broadly from the student's perspective, Meredith, the question that you didn't ask, but also the community of the I-5, is to say, how do we make space, a safe space for everyone involved to take those risks, to find out maybe they're not tapping into this ability to play with their students and see what this impactful 5 can do to their classroom, but then see what it looks like and ripples out into the broader business community and beyond. That who's going to track that? who's going to support them and create that space, and then who's going to track that so they can see the actual ripples, make that learning visible, if you will. And I think in a lot of ways, some of it is the background that I had working with Lego and understanding development from like a psychological construct and building what the community needs, from them finding out how they're actively adopting it, how are they engaging the community, are they taking risks, are they developing skills, and all of those things that maybe not everybody's interested in tracking, but we can, my team, we can do that. But then it allows us to get out of the way and for them to make the community to make those mistakes again and go further. And when they do that and they model that, just like I do for my children, and in fact, Mary and I were talking about my background kind of being a way of life, that play is a way of life, that when we do that and we model that for our students or for our children, then they start to see that this is okay. And actually, this is a good thing. And as we start to kind of have this generational ripple impact, not only on the students in the classrooms that we're working with, but beyond, now we start to say, this is a place for us to actually make those mistakes, find out what it looks like. And then the next generation of students that we're working with start to normalize this. And this is actually a really important piece of their existence, of their work. And to me, every step that we can take towards getting to the next generation to pick up and make our work better is a win. And that's what motivates me for this project and frankly, most of my life.
Very good. Thank you all. We do have some time left, so I would encourage anyone who has anything in the chat or in the Q&A that they'd like to go through. But perhaps in the meantime, if I could ask another question. Garrett, you were at the Global Forum last year. You presented, you helped us with playful interventions in a number of different sessions. But since then, you've kind of come more into the fold of Prime, and you've brought partners along with you. So it's not just you at Winded Vertigo, but you've been able to find other experts in the field around assessment, around creative play, around thinking, around education. Can you talk about the gaps that you have seen, or the opportunities, I guess more so, that you've seen, and how these can be filled, not just in these silos? Because I think one important thing for the listeners to take away today is just that this isn't an isolated conversation, that this fits the whole Prime landscape, it fits the whole higher education landscape, pedagogy development from the get-go, really. So just to kind of break down that silo, that we're not just the I-5 project playing by ourselves. Like, we have the whole Prime community, but we also have others beyond this call that extend.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces, at least from listening to the Prime community and listening to the Prime Secretariat, like what do we need to support them best? We brought developmental psychologists, we brought psychometricians, designers, facilitators to make this really come alive. And I think in many ways, what that allows us to do is, again, if you're a business faculty over here who maybe came from the industry and teaching is just something that you're picking up and you're moving along with, and you're on that end of, pedagogy isn't really something I think about that deeply, that's fine. Great. We're going to give you tools too, so you can explore it. And then those of you who are over here and have been like, I have been on board with this and play and innovation, and I'm always on the forefront and the cutting edge of what's going on. You know what? We're going to raise the ceiling so that you can go even further too. And everywhere in between, our ability is to look at the developmental pieces and then also to use really good design to deliver the messaging in a way that is useful for everybody, and not solely in peer-reviewed published articles, but in ways that are meaningful and applicable and kind of generate even more insights. That I think that allows us to really tap into the community and not just come in and drop what we think is best for the community, but that we have an ongoing iterative relationship and living the principles. I think that Jack was talking about too, is we're living this with you. And I think that's an important piece. And I think we have the team to do it.
No, there's more coming in the chat now. It seems to be kind of all in agreement about what's being said here. I think the speaking the languages from novice to expert that Paige put in really feels like the spirit of I-5 as well. The adoption from academics and the community. I mean, Chandrika wrote a beautiful paragraph up above of just how connected this can all become together. And I think that the DNA that you've each brought to the project as well, that we had the Prime DNA from the beginning, that we were very fortunate to be given part of the Lego DNA to play with and to iterate upon as well, that these are very solid brands that help give trust and do give that space, as Mary referenced, about, don't be afraid, just it's about being your authentic self and being true to what your value is there. So we have about 5 minutes left, so long as no more questions come through. But could I just pass it back to each of you for just a quick little closing statement on how you're feeling and how you see this moving forward and your own reflection from today?
Sure, I'll jump in. For me, what's really exciting is that I know the approach that I bring, but I feel like through Prime and through I5 and through Garrett and Jack's work, I feel like I'm just getting more tools and more methodologies to expand, the fundamental reframe that giving voice to values provides. I developed it initially, on paper. That's how I work. I work with words. My dissertation was on literature and film. That's how I think. But it also was very much a creative and an arts-based kind of approach. And so it's really nice to be able to realize that through this community, we're bringing together different kinds of tools. I would encourage people, if they're interested in exploring the idea of GVV, there's a 2-page PDF in the resources link under documents that has links to all the curriculum. There's hundreds of pieces of material and links to online programs, et cetera. And I encourage people to look at that. The other thing I'll say is that even though I developed this as an approach to think about acting on your values effectively and successfully, I was designing it intentionally so that it wasn't something for a responsible management course or an ethics course, or even just a stakeholder management course, but that it was really designed in such a way that it could fit into an accounting class or a finance class or a marketing class. And in fact, it is being used in that way. In fact, accounting is one of the areas that has used it most extensively. And I think that all of the work we're doing with Prime and with I5, we want to make sure that the tools we're developing are tools that educators and trainers and organizations who aren't necessarily focused on this subject feel like they can bring it to their work and effectively integrate all of these approaches, ideas, and commitments. So thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah, that's great, Mary. I guess as far as my closing statement goes, as I said, there's a ton of overlap between what Prime and the Dataface do and what we stand for. And I feel like I've just benefited so much from being a part of the community and learning about I5. So that's been great. Maybe if I could just riff for a moment. I mean, I think all of these I5 characteristics, all 5 of them are awesome in their own and unique way and all deserve to be part of curriculums. I think in particular, the thing that I've really gravitated to is this notion of designing for iteration. It's the one that really grabbed me initially, and it's the one that I guess I would encourage all the educators in the room to really think about and strive for, and how they kind of integrate it into their work, just because I think, yeah, our current educational system, at least when I was there, it was very much, learn the material, write the paper, take the test, get the grade, move on. And that's kind of how I at least experienced the educational system. What I've learned in business is it's just the polar opposite. You're just never done. You have an idea, you put it out in the market, you test, you iterate, you tweak the messaging, you do something new, you try to see what sticks, like you're constantly evolving. And that's just even how we work with the Dataface. Like in our interactions with Prime, it's always been, we present some designs, we get some feedback, we iterate, we do something new, right? So I feel like that's something that I wish I had more of in the classroom, of this like iterative approach to learning and thinking. So anyway, that's my just, plea for iteration in particular, but all of these characteristics are important, and I've loved working with you all. So yeah.
Great. I'm going to make it quick, but that both of those were really inspiring outputs there. Thank you. I think really what we were looking for is that not only are we focusing on the faculty, but I just want to put a point on the fact that we're working with students and that next generation to think about how do we help them, like what Jack was saying, how do we help them realize that iteration is a really strong tool? And as some countries say, done is better than perfect. That if we take on that and then kind of embrace the fact that we're just going to hurry up and get to the next pace and then learn from it and then keep iterating. And that's what a big part of what we do at Winded Vertigo, especially for the I5 project, is provide the tools, the culture, and a lot of the training around it to get out of the way and let you do that. And I think that's where the students can really thrive. And when we start to change the conversation from rote memorization of things to actually going out and trying to build something and make it work and make mistakes and see mistakes as opportunities, we're going to be tracking all of that. And that's, I think, a really exciting way to say that we're not just talking about doing the thing, we're actually helping you and supporting you to do that. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Yeah, beautifully said. I know everyone has to run to the next session, so thank you for joining us. Sam has shared the resources, and we hope to see many of you in person for the RMER conference this year. Take care. Bye-bye.